Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. As I record today, we are one day removed from the 48th anniversary of a profoundly dark day in the history of our country. It was January 22nd, 1973, when the Supreme Court of the United States handed down their decision on the case known as Roe v. Wade. Norma McCorvey was Roe being a fill-in name, as she wanted to remain anonymous. But Norma claimed to have suffered from a sexual assault and have been impregnated by it. She later confessed that that was not the case. And the state in which she lived did not allow for abortion, and the case made its way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court made a sweeping ruling grounded in the mush of what the majority opinion itself described as a right to privacy found in the emanations and penumbra of the Constitution, which means we can't find it in there. We just wish it was in there, and so we're going to say that it is. Their ruling determined that no state of the 50 states had the legal authority to in any way limit access to abortion in the first trimester. Now, I want you to keep in mind that trimesters are not real things. There's not some marker that the unborn goes by when they get to the beginning of second trimester. These are arbitrary. You can divide a pregnancy into 3 sections. You can divide it into 4 sections. You can divide it into 5 sections. You can divide it into 3.7 sections. But nevertheless, their ruling was in the first trimester, the state could not put any restrictions, any given state could not put any restrictions on the procuring of an abortion. In the second trimester, the state could regulate and control access to abortion with this limitation that comes when we get to the third trimester, where they ruled that the state could even outlaw abortion in the third trimester, except in the case in which the health of the mother is in danger, knowing full well that in legal parlance, health is so broadly defined that it can encompass being sad. That is, right now, in any state in America, 48 years later, the state will not prohibit you from getting an abortion up to the moment of birth, if it is your perspective, and a doctor will agree with you, that it would make you sad to have the baby. I want you to understand first the legal realities. This means that across this great nation, a baby up until the moment of birth can be put to death by an abortionist with the full protection of the law of the federal government. And that happened 48 years ago. And in the ensuing 48 years, we have witnessed more than 60 million babies being put to death. Hired assassins killing one's own child 60 million times. I believe it was Stalin who said, "One death is a tragedy. A million deaths is a statistic." I want us to understand that this is one death 60 million times. Now, again, none of this is new. This has taken place under the reign of Democratic presidents and Democratic Congresses and Democratic appointed justices. This has happened under Republican presidents and Republican Congresses and Republican appointed justices. There have been multiple times since 1973 when the Republican Party held the White House, a majority in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and a majority of justices that had been appointed and approved by Republicans. And quite literally, nothing has been done to chip away at these legal rights. Oh, there have been, in the context of states, rulings that have made it more difficult by making sure that doctors have privileges at local hospitals, making abortion mills meeting certain health standards. There have been some back and forth on the financing of abortion with the Hyde Amendment and the Mexico City policy. But at the end of the day, every word of Roe versus Wade still stands. Now, that's not news to you, which is why I'm bringing it up. Because it's not news. It's normal. It is part of the fabric of our society. In our next segment, we're going to do a curating your book library segment, and I'm going to talk about a book that describes the experience of that family which served as the United States ambassador to Germany in 1933, right after Hitler took power. You get in this book a insight into the experience of Americans watching the shift and the turn and the empowering of Adolf Hitler in that country, in that time frame. And that really is the focus, not that specific event, but there's a connection here. I want us to consider, to contemplate, to recognize, one, that the comparison of Nazi Germany to the abortion Holocaust is absolutely unfair. It's not apples to apples. If we were to make that comparison at all, we would have to conclude that the Nazis were far, far less wicked than we are. That Holocaust took place over the course of less than 10 years. That Holocaust happened by and large in secret. That Holocaust was carried out against a particular group of people by the government. Our Holocaust is carried out by moms and dads. Not a fair comparison at all. We are far, far more wicked. And yet, it's normal. It's perfectly normal. Now, I want to ask you, let's make a comparison here. Let's say that you're in the, widget business. You manufacture and sell widgets, and you find that your widget business is really struggling and you're not making much money and your family's starting to get a little bit hungry. But the reason that your widget business is doing poorly is because everyone's buying widgets manufactured and sold by your next door neighbor who happens to be Jewish. And you're hungry and your family's starting to get hungry and you start to feel that pressure and that weight, that financial weight. And you think, the only way for us to be able to carry on is if our business succeeds. And you go down the street and you talk to your local Nazi murderer and you say, my neighbor makes widgets and he's Jewish. Knowing full well that your neighbor will be dragged away and put to death. And now you can survive. Now you can eat. Now all that financial pressure is gone. Do you realize that's what we do when we go to the abortion mill? Someone who does not receive the protection of the state is put to death by our wish. And it's happened 60 million times. And we all, me and you and Christians across the globe, we all are more likely to begin our day wondering what our favorite sports team did last night than we are thinking about what can I do? What must I do? How do I participate in the work to stop this great evil? We look down our noses at Nazi Germany as if they are moral monsters, while we are angels, when the truth is we're more monstrous than they are. It all begins, friends, like every other sin problem. It all begins with our capacity, by God's grace, by the power of His Spirit, to look in the mirror, to recognize our own sins, and to cry out for God's mercy in Christ. This is what we are. We do what we do because we are what we are. And by the way, keep in mind that 1 out of every 6 people going to a local abortion mill to procure an abortion is an evangelical. We need to repent and cry out for God's mercy. And recognize that in the day of judgment, the Germans in the era of the Nazis will judge us. I mentioned in our previous segment that we would be doing a Curating Your Book library segment here, and that it would have a connection to our previous segment. The book that I'd like for us to consider during this segment is In the Garden of Beasts. The subtitle is Love, Terror, and an American Family in Hitler's Berlin. The author of this book is Erik Larson, and you may recall that we did a Curating Your Book library on another Erik Larson book in which I mentioned that he was a new guy to me and who had a number of books that interested me, and I was so impressed with the first one that I read, I was going to be getting more. And lo and behold, that's what I did. The previous book we looked at by Erik Larson was a account of the Chicago World's Fair around the turn of the 20th century, intertwined with an account of the first known serial killer in the United States, who operated in the same time and in the same place. And if you remember, I talked about Larson's unbelievable gift for writing history in a fictional kind of way. That's not to say this is historical fiction. He writes nonfiction, but his writing style is so smooth, so good, so adept at creating tension and releasing tension that it's very much like reading a novel. And that was certainly the case in the first one. I will confess, less so in this one. This one felt like a little more work, which surprised me because, we're all typically more interested in things like the Nazis than we are in things like a World's Fair. But to say it's not as novel-like as the other, however, is not to grumble or complain. The man is still a profoundly gifted writer, and this was a very interesting book, and as you might suspect, I commend it to you. Specifically because we get the opportunity close in to witness someone uninfluenced by the Nazi mindset, watching an entire country come under the sway of that mindset. Someone who's there. Someone who is at this time trying to maintain peace. This is set in 1933. This is a story of the ambassador and his family that have been sent to Nazi Germany by Franklin Delano Roosevelt during his first term. The fellow who was sent was a history professor and not a full-time lifelong diplomat. He was a history professor who actually took the job because he hoped that it would be cushy enough that he would be able to have time to finish his own magnum opus, his own great work of writing history that he had started a book about the Old South. Well, part of what we're reading is about the intrigue in Washington and among the diplomatic corps about this fellow because he wasn't too terribly widely liked. Part of the story is about his young daughter, who is in her 20s, and she is very much well liked, not only having relationships with various and sundry Nazis, with communists, including a fellow from the KGB, but also a number, more than one, of American authors, novelists, and such. So you get a lot of well-known people sort of crossing the stage in this account, including, of course, Hitler and Himmler and Goering and Rudolf Hess and Heinrich Heydrich and various and sundry characters. So it's really quite good. But why I want to commend it to you is precisely because of that perspective. Watching a country fall under the sway of a wildly destructive, unhealthy, and strange ideology. I don't know if any of you remember watching The Wave. I remember watching that as a teenager. It was some sort of made-for-TV movie about how sort of mass hysteria can happen where a history professor or teacher in a high school is trying to get his students to understand some of what happened in Nazi Germany. And they end up sort of embracing it, and it's kind of scary. But it teaches us a lesson, the lesson that I made in the previous segment that I want us to get. I think it's vitally important for us to never make the mistake of thinking that things like Nazism are strange, rare, something out there, something we're immune to. Watching, for instance, the Antifa behavior, and I've said this from the beginning, this is not Antifa anti-fascist. They are following the fascist playbook from beginning to end. One of the things we read about in the store or in this book is the Light of the Long Knives, when the SA leadership is taken down by Hitler himself for political reasons. You watch the wicked people betraying other wicked people, and it helps you understand that we are the wicked people. I commend the book to your reading. It won't go down easy. It should trouble our conscience. It's called In the Garden of Beasts. The author is Eric, with a K, Eric Larson. And you can find it at Amazon or any other online bookseller. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.